So I'm pleased to introduce today's presenter, Matt Healing. Matt is currently a master's student at the New Mexico State University within the USGS Cooperative Research Unit. He is a member of the Large Mammal Monitoring Project, led by Dr. James Kane, as part of the Southwest Jemez CFLRP. Matt earned his bachelor's degree in wildlife biology at Frostburg State University in Western Maryland. Since then, he has worked with federal natural resource agencies on monitoring and reintroduction of threatened and endangered species throughout New Mexico. Before beginning his current studies, Matt worked on a team monitoring populations of cooters and desert bighorn sheep on the, I'm going to butcher the name, Armendaris Ranch in southern New Mexico, while also providing support for other big game species. Most recently, he was a member of the wildlife program on the Santa Fe National Forest, working on post-fire efforts related to the Hermit's Peak Calf Canyon fire. We are so excited to have Matt join us today, and without further ado, I will turn it over to him.
Well, thanks, Rachel. Thanks everyone for attending this live session. Big thanks to Gloria for inviting me to do the webinar, and for her and Rachel for organizing everything and putting it all together. Much appreciated. So today I'm just going to be presenting on my master's project here at New Mexico State University on forest restoration and black bears in the Jemez Mountains. It's going to be kind of short, but I hope everyone finds this interesting and maybe applicable to some of the projects some of you have going on. So let me just pull up the PowerPoint here and we'll get started. It's good?
Looks good, Matt.
All right. So yeah, black bears, resource selection and responses to wildfires and forest restoration treatments in the Jemez Mountains. Presenter view. Okay. So historically in the Southwest, fire regimes and fire adapted forests were frequent surface fires of low to moderate severity, while large high severity fires occurred at higher elevations and were less frequent on the landscape. But almost a century of fire suppression, compounded by selective harvesting of large diameter trees, overgrazing of fine fields by livestock, and other practices has altered fire regimes in the Western US. Oh, my slides aren't going here. Okay, this has left forests with increased tree loads and high densities of small diameter trees, and increased tree densities have been associated with frequent and severe wildfire. These severe large fires negatively affect ecosystems by converting habitat from prior conditions. They reduce biodiversity, and they also upend ecosystem services. They also impact communities by causing property destruction, loss of life, and they disrupt local communities as well. In addition, climate models predict a drier future in the Southwest with less precipitation overall, which when combined with high densities of small diameter trees, the risk of catastrophic, large, high severity fires is even greater. So in response to this increasing frequency and size of high severity fires, fire managers are acting to mitigate this extreme fire behavior and to return forests to a more natural fire regime. So to do this, they're implementing practices such as forest thinning. It reduces the excessive buildup of surface and ladder fuels. Prescribed burns that seek to achieve the same goal through the use of fire. And managing fires in a way that reduces fire suppression when appropriate, or allowing wildfires to create that mosaic of successional stages on the landscape. So all these practices work together to restore historic fire regimes and reduce that frequency of large stand replacing fires. But as these forest restoration practices become more common on the landscape, there's a need to better understand how the effects of large-scale forest manipulation affect wildlife and habitat. So forest restoration treatments and reduced fire suppression can improve habitat, forage production and quality, and species diversity in some systems. But the responses to these disturbances vary by the species of interest, disturbance type, size, and time since disturbance, fire severity, and other unique landscape characteristics and climate of an area. So in north central New Mexico, the Southwest Jemez Mountains Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program, or CFLRP, is a joint effort between 40 collaborators ranging from federal and state agencies, tribal entities, universities, and NGOs. This group was active from 2010 to 2024, with the final report being released this year. And the goal of this group was to restore forest restoration ecosystems at the landscape scale and improve resilience to disturbances like fire, insects and disease, and climate change. Well, this was done through strategic forest restoration projects to improve forest structure and reduce the risk of high severity wildfires. Watershed and water quality projects were also implemented as part of the CFLRP, as well as long-term monitoring and research of fish and wildlife species. So within the Southwest Jemez Mountains CFLRP is the large mammal monitoring project. And the goal of this project is to simultaneously monitor the responses of mule deer, elk, mountain lions, and black bears to forest restoration treatments. Since 2011, many individuals from the Jemez Mountain populations have been fitted with GPS and VHF radio collars as part of the monitoring effort. So my master's thesis objective is to assess the seasonal resource selection of black bears at the within home range and landscape scale in the Jemez Mountains. And I evaluated resource selection in relation to the wildfires, treatment characteristics such as prescribed burns and forest thinning, burn severity, the time since disturbance, and other topographic and environmental variables known to be important to black bears. Okay, so black bears occupy a wide range of habitats, and it's well known their behavior is strongly influenced by food abundance. They utilize a mosaic of a dense overstory and a developed understory, which provides cover and food in the form of mass-producing shrubs and herbaceous plants. So there are a handful of studies on how black bears respond to wildfire, but less is known about how they respond to forest thinning and prescribed burns. So most studies in the literature look at how bears respond after a fixed time following a single disturbance, and typically not multiple disturbance types over many years. So when we look at the literature, Cunningham and Ballard reported a reduction in recruitment of yearlings for 3 years after the mostly high severity stand replacing lone fire in Arizona. And in a longleaf pine habitat in Florida, Stratman and Pelton observed bears selected areas 3 years after wildfires and prescribed burns, with the overall selection for those mature disturbance areas. So this was attributed more so to the timing of peak soft mass production after burns and oak availability and cover in areas that were disturbed less frequently. And more recent, Lewis et al. Observed higher use by bears in high severity burn areas and unburned areas 7 years after the wildfire when compared to moderate burn severity. So the consensus is immediate to short-term effects of fire can be detrimental, especially after high severity fires, but the long-term effects may result in increased use for black bears. And we also have few examples of the effects of prescribed burns and forest thinning. So as I mentioned before, our study area is centered within the Jemez Mountains and the surrounding areas in northern New Mexico at over 3,600 square kilometers. So the Jemez Mountains is a volcanic field resulting from the Valles Caldera supervolcano over 1 million years ago, with Valles Caldera National Preserve at the center of it all. So Santa Fe National Forest and Valles Caldera National Preserve makes up the majority of the study area at 95%. Bannerler National Monument falls in at 3%, and Jemez, Santa Ana, Santa Clara, and Coche de Pueblos make up the remaining 2%. Elevation in the study area ranges from 1,600 meters to 3,400 meters. So with the lower elevations in the Jemez, pinyon juniper woodlands dominate. Ponderosa pine stands are found at mid elevations. Mixed conifer stands of spruce, fir, and Doug fir are found at the highest elevations, with aspens interspersed or adjacent. Oak woodlands are found at a wide range of elevations in the study area. Yeah, this is not a great image, but there's some gamble oak there in the foreground overlooking, I believe that's San Antonio Creek. And herbaceous meadows are abundant within Valles Caldera National Reserve and less concentrated outside of the property. So this is Valle Grande near the main entrance of the preserve. So to model seasonal habitat selection of black bears, I use resource selection functions that estimate the relative probability of use of resources in relation to their availability. So I took our black bear GPS location data from 2012 to 2021, and I subset that data into spring, summer, and fall in relation to black bear natural history. I then defined availability by creating 6-hour kernel density estimates for the within home range and landscape scale. And I populated those with 3-hour use points and randomly generated points at a ratio of 25 available points to 1 use point. I then developed a base model by testing a list of prior models that included topographic and vegetation variables, and I chose the best performing model. I then added disturbance and time since disturbance as a single categorical variable. So this table here on the right shows the covariates we used in our base model. So we have veg type, shrub cover as a continuous variable, elevation, slope, and aspect, northness, a ruggedness index, and topographic position index. We did include quadratics for some of these continuous variables, and we used animal ID as a random effect, allowing for that variability across individual bears. So the disturbance data we use included 22 years of disturbance data from 1998 to 2020. And we pulled this from the Wildfire data set, and I believe 1998 is as far back as it goes right now. And I used a unique age classification for each disturbance based on the data distribution of disturbances for the observed and random points. So for prescribed burns, that meant a 1 to 3 years and 4 years post-disturbance. For thinning treatments, 1 to 5 years, 6 to 10, and greater than 10 years post-disturbance. And for wildfires, I had to use a different age class for spring compared to summer and fall because that data set had a reduced number of locations. So for spring, we ended up with 1 to 5 years post-disturbance and greater than 5 years. And for summer and fall, matching that thinning treatments, 1 to 5 years, 6 to 10, and greater than 10. And within the Jemez Mountains, slash from thinning treatments are typically piled up and then burned in the colder months. So what we did for any areas that were thinned and then burned, they were classified as thinning treatments and not prescribed burns. So this map here shows the most significant stand replacing wildfires in recent history in the Jemez Mountains. So the first one, the La Mesa fire in '77, followed by the Dome Fire and Serra Grande fires that really impacted the community of Los Alamos. Then we have the Las Conchas fire in 2011, which was the largest wildfire in the state of New Mexico at the time. And that burned mostly at high severity. And then more recently, we have the Cerro Colorado fire in 2022, which reburned a lot of that, that Las Conchas burn scar. So we can see these fires were concentrated on that drier leeward side of the mountain, that side away, facing away from the prevailing winds, and with pretty consistent overlap throughout the years. And these maps just show the distribution of our locations within the study area. So kind of get oriented with the Vice Caldera Preserve right in the center. So on the left, we have males symbolized in blue and females in red, and darker hues indicate a higher concentration of points. And on the right, we just have a total distribution of points symbolized by year. So we can see there's a pretty good coverage of locations throughout the years. So moving on to our results, I'm just going to be going over some patterns of selection that we saw across all seasons for both scales. And I'll just start with spring. Oh, one more thing. So these are log odd plots. So on that vertical line, the left of the vertical line represents avoidance, and to the right represents selection. So during spring, bears selected areas that burned. They selected areas that had recently burned at a low to moderate severity, so like 1 to 5 years post disturbance, and they also selected prescribed burns 1 to 3 years post disturbance. They avoided thinning treatments altogether for all age classes during spring. They also avoided prescribed burns and areas of recent high severity fire. Bringing in summer and fall. So for all seasons, bears avoided areas of thinning treatments at both scales and for all age classes. During summer, bears selected areas that had of recent prescribed burns, but they avoided the older treatments. But the opposite was true in fall, with bears selecting for those older prescriptions and avoiding recent prescribed burns. Also, during summer, bears selected areas most recently burned by wildfires for all severities, but they avoided the recent wildfires in the fall. During fall, we also saw consistent evidence for selection of older wildfires as well. So when we compare patterns of selection for disturbances and ages across seasons and scales, prescribed burns showed the highest magnitude of selection at the landscape scale. And at the home range scale, high severity fires with the longest time since disturbance and prescribed burns at the highest magnitude of selection. So we can speculate for spring and summer. Bears may be selecting for that post-fire vegetation response, where the canopy is opened and nutrients are released, allowing for that rapid regrowth of herbaceous grasses and forbs, and also stimulating shrub growth as well. Within the Jemez, common berries like raspberries and thimbleberries that black bears definitely use can germinate as soon as 1 year after a high severity fire, and they can produce berries as soon as 2 years. And if we were to look at the selection ratios for shrub cover for spring and summer, we would see a similar selection or higher during summer, which might indicate a shift towards shrub species during summer and away from those herbaceous food items that bears use during spring. And as expected, selection for shrub cover was greater in the fall during that time of hyperphagia, where they really just maximize on calories. And for bears selecting those areas, those older disturbances in the fall, they may be preferring those areas of fire-based disturbance that are older because they typically include mature and recovered shrubs that tend to produce more abundant fruits en masse. And another food item that I haven't touched on, I guess, insects. I suspect some of the selection for the most mature wildfires could be attributed to insect foraging, but we haven't looked at the diet data in detail as yet. So bears use areas that overlap with all disturbance types, but they really selected for those fire-based disturbances of wildfires, prescribed burns during different seasons and differing time since disturbances. They selected for more recent disturbances during spring and summer, and older disturbances in the fall. And because we saw selection across all severities, that can highlight the importance of biodiversity on the landscape. So that variation in fire history, size, or intensity creates that mosaic of successional stages that provides a range of ecological niches that wildlife can exploit. And when it comes to bears avoiding those thinning treatments, previous work by Bard and Kane has shown that bears prefer bed sites with low horizontal visibility and high stand basal area and dense sites with low horizontal visibility as well. Some other studies even suggest that bears will select areas of sufficient cover even when food resources are plentiful in adjacent areas. And this is most likely when security cover is limited in a certain area. But when we look at this graph of mean vegetation percent cover by type, in addition to undisturbed areas, we can see that areas treated with prescribed burns and forest thinning have a significantly higher tree cover, which is probably why they were selected for those forest restoration treatments. While areas of wildfire that bears use have a more balanced ratio of tree cover, definitely increased herbaceous content and higher shrub cover throughout the years as well. So that greater vegetation complexity is probably supporting bears through all the seasons. And these pictures represent typical thinning treatments within the Jemez area. So you can see lots of bare ground, really effective at reducing those fuels, but not much herbaceous content in the form of grasses and forbs, not really much shrubs, and pretty clean when it comes to woody debris and rotting downfall from fires, which acts as insect habitat. So these fuel reductions were really effective at achieving their goal, but it also removed resources of food and cover that black bears really rely on, creating unfavorable conditions. And on top of that, we have a lack of fire effects as well that really, those fire effects really stimulate vegetative growth. And here's another before and after on Valles Caldera. So a little bit more of that, a little bit more herbaceous content, but still that removal of ladder fuels. We have removal of the down debris and small shrubs and trees as well. So if fire and land managers want to reduce the risk of large catastrophic fire while maintaining or improving habitat for black bears or even other species that rely on a complex understory, prioritizing prescribed burns over thinning treatments should be considered. But if it's not practical or an appropriate option, especially given the risk of prescribed burns, thinning treatments may need to be completed in a way that's less liberal when it comes to removing fuels to reduce the risk of high severity fire. So to wrap things all together, black bears may benefit from a heterogeneous landscape composed of a mosaic of wildfire, prescribed burns, and potentially more conservative forest thinning treatments. This mosaic creates diverse plant communities across the landscape that bears can benefit from by using different patches for forage, cover, and other needs across all seasons as resource availability and nutritional needs change. So moving forward, we'll be looking at some sex-specific differences in terms of how black bears respond to these disturbances. We'll also be looking at functional responses of disturbances. So as the proportion of a disturbance within a given area, within a bear's given area changes, does that affect selection? And we're also hoping to create some models of soft and hard mass to explain why we're seeing some of these selection patterns across disturbances. And with that, I'd like to thank our funding sources, Dr. Kane and Bob Parmenter, for keeping this project going throughout the years. Federal and state agency that were super helpful in the field for captures, den checks, and logistics. My grad student pairs that came out to help, and my hardworking technicians. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt. That was a really excellent presentation, short and sweet. So we have plenty of time for questions. And thanks to everyone who's already put some of those in the chat. And I'm wondering, it might be helpful to actually go back to your conclusions page. I think that some folks would be interested in being able to capture those with a little more time.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, feel free to just jump in with questions.
Okay. So to kick it off, Laura asked, is the avoidance of thinning areas having a negative impact on the black bear population? And does applying a prescribed burn a couple years post-thinning help to offset some of those negative impacts that it might have on populations?
Okay, I'll start with that first one. We don't really have any like population data, but based on these results from our RSFs, we can see that they're avoiding these areas, and it's probably not contributing to their to greater fitness. But there's a lot of heterogeneity on this landscape, and a lot of resources that bears can work around throughout the different times of year to really like meet their needs. So yeah. And what was that second question?
Yeah, Laura wondered, does implementing a prescribed burn a couple of years post-thinning help to offset some of those negative impacts that it might have on a population?
I could see that being a case, but I don't think that's too common within the Jemez in terms of the strategy and the timing of some of these disturbances where a prescribed burn would happen before thinning practice. But I can see that being beneficial, but even still, I would expect that the thinning treatments after that prescribed burn should probably be a little less liberal in terms of like cleaning the forest floor, and I think that would benefit bears pretty much.
Okay, yeah, I think Laura may have been referring to the opposite order, so thinning and then burning.
Oh, well, yes, absolutely. That would definitely benefit bears because you're introducing those fire back onto the landscape, stimulating vegetation growth and creating that vegetation complexity. So for sure, definitely.
Okay, awesome. So Shannon asked a really good follow-up question to that, which is, where do these bears relocate to? So thinking about how far out from the fire and thinning locations, and how many home ranges of bears overlapped in your research?
In terms of, so the Jemez Mountains is it's a really productive area. There's lots of resources. And like it kind of ties into that last question in terms of, yeah, so where they relocate to. There's enough heterogeneity on the landscape that there's resources in patches in the Jemez that are pretty abundant. So they make it work. They get what they need. I mean, they might have to, avoid their like favorite oak patch or something, but there's lots of vegetation in the Jemez Mountains to really keep them there. And it's a pretty robust population. Looking at the data over the years, I didn't really see any evidence of them honestly leaving the Jemez and and exploring other areas. They might head out to the Rio Grande to the east, maybe some trips to the north and south into the Pueblos, but they're not really, we didn't see any evidence of them leaving the Jemez Mountains. And what was the second part of that question? Second question.
Yeah, and this is actually sort of a two-part second question.
Okay.
So how many home ranges of bears overlapped? And did you observe any increase of mortality due to home ranges overlapping?
So we looked at seasonal home ranges as opposed to annual home ranges or just a cumulative home range. But there is constant overlap within these bears. These bears are in and out of each other's home ranges all the time, males and females. I That's what we see in the Jemez area. I mean, you might have some less overlap between males of different age classes just because they're dominant and they want to keep their females. And we don't have any data on mortality when it comes to the disturbances, but that's probably something we can work with New Mexico Game and Fish numbers, and because they tag all their animals and harvest and locations, and we could probably draw some conclusions from that.
Okay, and just as an aside, because you brought up data, we did have one person ask, Lance was asking if you have a GIS layer with the GPS data or calving grounds. So if you, I'll go ahead and put Matt's email address in the chat, and Lance, maybe you can reach out directly, or anyone else who wants to connect and maybe access some of this data.
Sounds good.
All right. Gloria was wondering if you saw much of a difference between coniferous areas versus gamble oak. So that's sort of the first question. Second part is, were there any plots of prescribed fire in oak in the study area? And did you see any results in those oak prescribed burns?
Okay, repeat that first one.
Okay.
let's do this one at a time.
Yeah, perfect. Did you see much of a difference between coniferous areas versus gamble oak?
We saw we would expect a shift in seasonal use, probably staying closer to mixed conifer, the edges of mixed conifer in spring and summer. But for fall, there's that affinity to really hit those shrub species during hyperphagia to get all those calories from things like gamble oak. I think there's some like turbinella oak. What is that one? Juniper, when it does fruit, and pinion as well. Did that answer the question?
Yeah.
But in terms of the disturbances, we haven't looked at that yet, and the associations with disturbances and vegetation types.
Okay, so that might kind of answer the second question about, was there any prescribed fire in oak that in the study area that you got results out of?
I think there probably were some treatments close to Bandelier on the south side, and even on the south side of Jemez, I don't know, this on the Ponderosa area. So yeah, I think there was definitely, if Bob is here, I know he would know pretty well. But yeah, I think there are some treatments within the oak and adjacent to PJ.
Okay, awesome. And while we're on the topic of oak, I was wondering, did you see any preference for areas that were burned at high severity and maybe came back with a higher oak cover and lower horizontal visibility as far as bear denning habitat?
We did see a lot of that in terms of them using that high areas that had burned at high severity, and then a strong regeneration in terms of oak and I think it was locust as well. Jesse Lewis from Arizona, he just came out with a paper pretty recently showing that oak regeneration really depends on fire. I think aspens as well, but in terms of den use, didn't look at habitat type and den use, but just thinking to the dens that I've been to, yeah, I mean, a lot of those dens were in high severity areas with not the most horizontal cover, but some horizontal cover, and they tend to be south facing, especially on the caldera. So, but yeah, I also did notice, I mean, there'll be stands of oak just all around the dens, not necessarily within burns, but they'll forage right outside of the den until they're ready to go in.
Okay, awesome. Cassandra, who is a fellow grad student from Colorado, was wondering if you can talk a little bit more about the choice of thinning versus prescribed fire management. You know, what is done more often and what other factors go into deciding to do one treatment or the other?
I'll try to answer that as best as I can. I'm not we more so looked at the data side of things. I wasn't too involved in like a lot of the planning of these restoration treatments. But I think the thinning is definitely carried out more on the HAMAS as opposed to prescribed burns, just because of risk. And what was the other part of the question? Was it in the chat?
Just what was done more often and what factors go into deciding to do one over the other?
I assume it would be that the the risk of unintentional fire on the landscape might make some fire managers apprehensive to carry those out. And then also there's the proximity to the Los Alamos community as well, and the National Nuclear Lab. So that's a high risk resource. Yeah, that's something that definitely needs to be taken into consideration, and would probably explain as well also why those thinning treatments are more likely to be carried out than prescribed burns.
Yeah, and Cassandra, I just posted the link again to access the CFLRP 15-year monitoring report, where some of Matt's findings are located. And that is a very large report that also goes into some of those other things you're wondering about, you know, where folks decided to burn, where they decided to thin, why, and what some of the other monitoring findings were. Alrighty, so we're getting close to the end of the presentation here. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I do have one more for you, Matt. At the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned that you did a literature review and it was pretty sparse or pretty scarce. So I was just wondering if your findings about specific elements that might influence bear preference for unburned or post-fire areas, you know, such as food availability, you know, habitat, prey species use. So were your findings sort of borne out in the literature review?
Meaning?
When you did your lit review, did those authors also talk about specific things that might lead to bears returning to burned areas 3 to 7 years post-fire?
Yeah, definitely though. The stuff from Florida, I know it's not in the Southwest, but you know, a lot of those soft mass species kind of operate on the same timeline where they need time to recover and produce those large volumes of fruit that bears rely on. And then I think there was other literature from, I think it was in the Southwest. They looked at spring use by bears, and bears also they were tracking that, they called it the green wave. So they were tracking the trends of NDVI in the spring. So selecting for those that would indicate like higher nutritional quality of vegetation, since that's primarily what they're eating during the spring times, right? So like herbs, forbs, grasses, and maybe like some dandelions and things like that. So yeah, it definitely jives with what we've seen in the literature. Yeah. And of course, everyone knows bears love to eat in the fall as well, and they hit those shrub and oak species. So definitely.
Okay, awesome. Well, it's great to see your research coming out of the Southwest, sort of adding to that body of work. We had a couple of people asking if there's a link to a research paper on this work yet. So
Not
again,
yet.
yeah. So I'll refer you all to the CFLRP 15-year monitoring report, and you can refer to chapter 8, page 243 to read about Matt's work. But we'll certainly keep an eye out for future publications.
So in terms of like the disturbances directly, no, not yet. But there is previous work by, I think you'll see here, Bard and Kane. They looked at some densite work and some daybed work as well. And I think there's another paper with Kindshu and Kane, and they were looking at modeling cluster sites or like feeding sites within this area as well. But I think the Bard and Kane paper probably touched more on the disturbances than the other paper as well. And there's also other publications out within the Large Mammal Project about selection from deer and elk. And there's definitely going to be some few more coming out in a few years that we're all really excited about.
Okay, awesome. And I will go ahead and get a roundup of some of those relevant papers from Matt and send those out as links in my follow-up email with the recording that everyone on this call should receive. Alrighty. If you want to go ahead and get in contact with Matt to ask more questions, his email is mkeeling@nmsu.edu. I just put it in the chat, so feel free to reach out. I would like to thank you, Matt, so much for coming on today and doing a presentation with us and answering all of our questions. It's great to have you join the consortium and the network. And thank you to everyone who joined online today.
I just see a question from Bob. Bob, okay, that is on my to-do list. I'm assuming that we will find some evidence for that for bears foraging on those cutworm moths, especially around the Redondo area. But we haven't gotten there yet. I haven't forgot about it. And thanks for everyone for attending, and I hope I didn't burn through that too fast.
No, that was perfect. And while you're on it, actually, Gloria was also wondering if you saw any habit of bears foraging for tuberous roots in more exposed areas post-fire.
That's a good question. So this kind of ties into your other question. There are a lot of diet items in the literature that we saw no evidence for in the Jemez area at least. And I didn't, some grad students did some diet work, and I did like one season. I didn't really see too much of them digging around for roots, but I did see a lot of consumption of like ground dwelling insects, just like, you know, your typical what you expect, like ants, but also ground dwelling wasp, like just tearing up the nest and face first. So yeah, stuff like that. Not really the roots.
Yeah, it sounds like there's definitely some room to do more of this research in different areas. Absolutely. Just because the vegetative availability is going to be so different in different regions. So, all right, awesome. Well, thank you so much. Thanks again, everyone, for joining today, and we'll catch you on the next one. Take care.